Today, I'll be sharing with you a new idea on move two of the Sicilian defense that's been played by players like Morozevich and Kasimshanov. And it's not going to be a move like A3 that Beskidov wrote a book about in 2004. And it's not going to be the move knight A3 that Vadim Stragintsev played in 2006 in the Russian Championship. But rather, it's this move of A4 that has started to become somewhat popular as a bit of a shock weapon, and it's true that when you play a move like A4, you're kind of saying that, okay, we're basically playing a reverse Sicilian with C4, E5 with colors reversed and this extra tempo. But we will see this move A4 is a useful waiting move that does give us a certain flexibility, where depending on the way setup that black goes for, we can kind of adapt and play the best setup accordingly. Now, let's say if they play a move like D6 and we play F4 in response. Well, here we kind of have got a Grand Prix attack where we managed to avoid the move that's kind of the problem with F4, which is the move D5 directly, where this gambit ends up giving black extremely good compensation for the pawn. For example, a position like this would actually already be better for black despite being currently a pawn down due to the weaknesses in white's position. So when we play it in this way, well, now the move D5 would take an extra move from black is kind of the point here. And I've included quite a few games, so by the end of this training, you'll definitely be ready to play the move A4 with confidence in your own games, and I think it's definitely going to be a big shock to your opponents. Also, if you're enjoying the video, do make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. Let's get into the games. So the first game was between Hamatevisi, the Moldovan player, against Maxim Chigayev. This was from a Title Tuesday, and this game here, it kind of shows the value of playing bishop b5 in a way, because after bishop b7, well, now a4 is actually kind of a useful move, and we've gained this little bit of flexibility compared to a normal Grand Prix attack. The normal Grand Prix attack is normally something like knight c3 and, something along these lines in order to avoid the d5 issue we saw before. And then, you're often going to get a position like this one, but if you compare a position like this to the one that arises in the game, well, we can see here we didn't have to play the move of knight c3. We have a bit more of a flexible setup where maybe we'll play c3 instead, or maybe the knight can go to d2 instead, depending on what they play. So it does have a little bit of bite to it. And also, if they do play a move like a6 to kick our bishop, well, then we have a very nice move here in the move of a5 that just allows us to fix the queenside structure, and then I can come to c4, and we're seeing some very fresh strategic problems for the opponent in this case. In fact, I would say the position is already easier for white to play in this position. So in the game, Chugayev plays knight f6. White, normally speaking, would just go queen e1 and try to make an attack happen with, say, queen h4 and this sort of thing. That would be the standard play in such positions. Maybe with bishop c6 thrown in as well. But white plays a bit more creatively with queen e2, and I will admit the game maybe lose a little bit of its relevance. I do think white probably hasn't played it in the best way, and that the position probably is only going to be equal rather than the lines of queen at h4 where you do get to ask some difficult questions. Still, it is kind of impressive in a way that white was able to outplay a player 200 points higher rated than him. Probably what black should do is just go queen c7 and try to get counterplay in the center to as a way to maintain the balance, but instead, after b5, I kind of got to show one of the main ideas of a4, which is that we just kind of have the more flexible pawn structure. Even a move like e5 can be a way to create some pressure, but in the game, white just develop more slowly, and after d5, some more moves were played. We can kind of say, looking at this position here, the white does have a nice advantage. Even a move like f5 would have been a nice way to start an attack. But okay, white was still able to get a very good position from here, where at this point black probably does have to give up the bishop pair and accept he's just worse. Because the problem with the move knight d7 in the game is that it just blunders to takes and knight b6, and with this fork white was able to win the exchange, and he did go on to convert his material advantage into a win in the game. Like, I think we can stop here. Like, it's pretty clear that white is going to win from a position like this one, as he did in a few more moves. So yeah, these are the final moves in case you're wondering. But yeah, that's the idea that I want to show of what to do if they play G6. Because again, if you think about it from the reverse swing position, like G3 is kind of the second most common move after knight C3. So this is the sort of move that someone might play, thinking by sort of analogy to a reverse Sicilian. But what if black plays a different move? What if they play a move such as knight C6, for example? Well, in this case, white's idea is to play bishop b5. And again, you're kind of saying you've got like a Rossolimo, but where it's a little bit more flexible because you haven't committed yourself to blocking one of the pawns yet. And if black does play moves such as knight d4, which did happen in a Morozevich game against Bocharov 2023, there's actually kind of a few ways you can play it, but it's sort of a note worth noting that knight d4 is not going to be as effective in this version compared to the version with bishop b5 in this Tivyakov anti-Sicilian system. And the reason that it's not as effective is because, well, now we've managed to defend the bishop with the pawn instead, meaning that if they take, well, we just improve our structure. And, in this case, the a7 pawn is just a long-term weakness. So in a position like this, you are just going to basically have an open Sicilian on steroids from here. Even c4, I guess, could also play in the Marachi bind style. But this is to say that knight b5 is now a strategic mistake. But if they wait around forever, then you do also have a move such as, let's say, c3, where you're able to kick away the knight in a way that is not possible if you have the move knight c3 played already. If they take on f3, we'll kind of see in the game why that's kind of good for white. But again, even with a tempo less, this transformation of structure will also be somewhat in white's favor. So in the game, Bocharov tries this move of knight f3, which I do think is a little bit imprecise in this position. White has a very clear lead in development, and yeah, I mean, even a move like e5 would actually be quite promising, just kind of playing to bring the knight to d6 and sort of exploit black's lack of development. But okay, or actually, rather the move a5 is actually the move recommended. I kind of like had a bit of a blind spot because like the bright light where I thought a5 was e5, but yeah, a5 is going to be the key move actually, where yeah, you're just kind of able again to sort of fix their structure as it were, and make it really hard for them to get their bishop out with the pressure. But it's a little bit of a computerish idea. So in the game after castles, yeah, some more moves were played. You could argue that maybe Morozevich's way of playing it wasn't absolutely the most precise. Yeah, something like c3 and trying to get in the d4 break might be a better way to get an edge, but still White was able to get some sort of fresh position, and yeah, in the a rising clay did manage to outplay his opponent, even if at this point maybe it's not actually so bad for Black if he does get his act together with getting the pieces to good squares. Okay, it's a bit of an unclear position, we could say. But yeah, I think that a move like either a5 here is sort of an improvement just to get a nice advantage. Or if you do want to play this, yeah, something like either bishop e2 and going for it this way, or c3. Like as long as you kind of play for the d4 break, you can't really, I think, go too far wrong from there. Now, what if they don't play the move knight d4? What if they play something else? Interestingly enough, the computer, yeah, also points out that you can play moves like e6 or knight f6 as black, which are kind of not included in the model games. But if someone does play this, you can again sort of make the point that you do have a bit more of a flexible pawn structure, as you haven't played knight c3 and you haven't played knight f3. So it just makes the position a little bit more creative, where, say, if d6, you can then transition again, back towards that sort of Grand Prix where you haven't had to play the move knight c3, and therefore can, say that your structure is just that little bit more flexible in a position like this. And yeah, objectively, Injun says it's just equal, but we already saw in the Chigayev game before how this can practically be a little bit unpleasant for black to play, whereas white's ideas tend to be fairly straightforward. And also in the case of e6, again, you're kind of able to take and sort of make this point that, compared to the Rossolimo lines, let's say, where you have knight f3, and this is one of the main options that that white can play against this e6 Rossolimo. Like if you compare the two positions, yeah, it might seem at first that knight f3 is going to be more useful than a4, but there are definitely some benefits to the move to not having to move knight to f3 in as well. Where, for example, if d5, you can play a move like queen e2 and f4, and again go for that kind of Grand Prix stuff where your pawn structure is going to be more flexible, and you're looking at the engine moves, the lines the engine is sort of recommending to maintain the balance of black, like playing c4 at different points is definitely not the most intuitive reaction from a human point of view. So we're definitely setting a few problems, and again, if they play e5, which is kind of a so that black will often want to play in these positions. Again, you get that option of f4 and just getting this very original sort of play where maybe from a computer point of view it might not seem like much for white, but I do think from the human point of view or the practical point of view, it is a lot easier to play white. And also if 1970 moves like bishop d6 can also be a little bit annoying as well, just to take away that bishop pair from black. So you do have a lot of very interesting strategic ideas, even if they do, let's say, not play a move like knight d4 and play something else. And also in this Morozevich game against Dragalov, also from Russian Team Championship 2023 in Blitz. Yeah, there's a few ways you can play it, but f4 is kind of the way to sort of justify the whole plan in a way, going for that sort of improved Grand Prix. Now, if you are concerned about a move like d5 kind of hitting back in the center, then yeah, you could play a move like d3 and then f4, which might be a little bit more flexible. But okay, in the game, it ends up being a kind of a transposition anyway. Also, kind of noteworthy that the computer's already saying that if Black wants to equalize, it probably has to go for the knight h6 setup. But yeah, I don't think a lot of players are going to play something like this in an actual game because it looks a little bit less natural. But in this case, I do think White has got a little bit of an edge to work with. Again, some of the moves the engine is suggesting are not really the most natural from a human point of view. And after d6, we kind of just get what we're really aiming for, which is to mess up their structure and just go for the attack. And again, it's true a4 isn't maybe the most useful move for us, but we have managed to kind of get an improved version of a normal Grand Prix attack once again. Now in the game, I decided again to play it rather creatively, where I think that if you want to just play a move like knight c3 and say h3 and just build up the attack this way, or even indeed h3 directly, I do think that something like this would give white a small advantage objectively. In the game, knight bd2, yeah, certainly a creative move, but probably not quite as precise. Because black does have some chance to go knight h5 and they can try to, fight back on this side of the board. But in the game after bishop a6, which I think doesn't really do a whole lot here, white was able to stabilize and just leave both the bishops looking very passive. And after d5, the problems are only really compounded in a way, as now the c5 pawn becomes quite weak, and I could have even targeted it with bishop a3 immediately, which might have been a bit more precise. But in again, e5 was played, and once black misses his last chance to go c4 and free his structure, which is kind of the reason why I was playing bishop a3 first to avoid this possibility. But once you get in c4 like this, it's basically just a strategically lost position where white is going to focus the fire on the c5 pawn. If you play d4, it gives the e4 square for the knight. And I mean, that's pretty much what happened in the game where black tried to get out the straightjacket at f6. But the problem is that then in this position now, the bishop is horrible and there are just even more weaknesses in the black position. And, from here, there was just no real way for black to defend this pawn. Again, if d4 just, even queen d2 and just getting out of queen a5 is just nigh impossible for black. So I was able to take the pawn and just win in a few more moves from here. Nothing too fancy. So yeah, we can see, it's probably not the most biggest surprise that you see a player like Morozevich who is playing this sort of a4 as white, but he does seem to be having pretty good results with it. Now to conclude this video, I'm going to share also a couple of games where they play e6, which in some ways might be the most logical move. Like it's a one move where a4 is maybe not looking so obviously useful, but there are definitely still some points here. Now, it's worth noting the computer actually thinks that the best move is to go knight f3, and it's saying that if you go a6, well, then a4 is kind of useful. Or if they go knight c6, you go bishop b5 and just kind of play this, this sort of Roslima with the move a4 thrown in, saying that it's not that bad. But you could probably argue that such an approach like this is maybe not the most consistent with the spirit of the move a4. Something like d5, for instance, is going to be pretty comfortable for black at the end of the day with some d4 ideas to kind of follow. So really the approach is in the spirit of this system is to play the move of f4, and it actually reminds me a little bit of system that I used to play a decade ago, which was to play bishop e2, and then going for this system with f4, where you kind of play like e6, knight f3, and you just go for this kind of like French style sort of position. Or some might like it to an improved bird's opening where you got an e4 in one go. But you're definitely getting a very similar sort of position when you play a4 and you go for this sort of thing. Now, yeah, you could probably argue maybe a4 isn't quite as useful as bishop e2, but you're still getting a kind of similar sort of position on the board in a sense. Now, there was a game between Petrák against Fürostak in the Bundesliga last year that I do want to touch on just quickly. I think the knight f6 move order might be a little bit imprecise for black potentially. Maybe more from a human point of view than objectively, but I think that the fact that the knight does get kicked away after e5 is not really ideal. That if you do play knight d7, that your knight is going to end up being a little bit misplaced in a structure like this, where again, if it takes, you kind of just get the squares for your pieces that you're kind of looking for, and a4 may not be that great, but it's sort of worse for black that they misplace their knight, and a move like knight g4 also maybe not the most human move, let's say, in such a position to bring the knight around like this. Well, in the game, black went knight g8, Petrak played c3, and yeah, the move h5 in some ways is quite a human one, trying to go for the blockade on the light squares. But I do think it's probably better for black just to go knight h6, and this might have been a better way for black to maintain the balance. We can sort of say that a position like this is maybe comparable to the line of the French, where you have like f4, and I think there was some like Nakamura game he played was like over a decade ago in a US Champs where he just kind of played this sort of system like c3, knight f3, and just this kind of thing like knight c2, and kind of sort of playing it in a bit more of a creative fashion. So yeah, you can sort of see a few parallels between this a4 and quite a few other systems, both main lines and sidelines. So it's true if you have a little bit of I guess, awareness of some of these other systems, it definitely makes it much easier to play this slightly subs effectively. But also keep in mind that your opponents are also unlikely to be familiar with sort of the subtleties of, say, some of these other sidelines, so it just gets you a fresh position with, I think, pretty good chance to outplay. I do think the game maybe loses a little bit of its relevance around this point, because I do think that Black is doing quite well, and White's eventual win was probably more the result of some subsequent mistakes by Black rather than, the opening per se. But I do think if White plays a move such as either, knight a3 as we were talking about, just going for this kind of thing like bishop e3 and playing for the d4 push at the right time, or even in fact playing d4 directly and again just losing the fact they're just a little bit slow to kind of get that pressure against the center. I think either way, this position like this is going to be a little bit better for White. So that's a pretty good reason of why knight f6 maybe not the ideal move order. And finally, to conclude, we have really the best game of the selection, which actually I kind of learned this game from a Gotham chess video. So if it looks a little familiar, that might be the reason why. But basically, this game between Kasim Janov against Tabatabai, it sees this d3, and you might be wondering what if they take and make White lose the right to castle. But much like in the bishop e2 line, you are getting this very harmonious position where if you are able to get in a few more moves to develop, then yeah, you are going to have a space advantage, and Black would probably need to at some point like change the nature of the position if he wants to get a comfortable equality. But okay, like the game still goes on, like you've got an original position where you can still play for the win as White. But as it was, Black played the move of bishop e7, and my guess is probably that Tabatabai picked this up from Rudik Makarian, because he often likes to play that against the super bishop e2 lines per se. But yeah, I mean, it's still a normal position. There are different subs of like knight a3 with c3 can be played, and the move a4 fits in quite well actually in stopping the queenside expansion. Now, obviously, it's true from a computer point of view that this position is objectively quite pleasant for black. So yeah, it's a4. Maybe not something that you want to play in every single game, but it can be a nice surprise weapon for just that little bit of variety and some fresh positions on the board. So up to f6, knight f3, yeah, if we're talking objectively, I think the position is probably just going to be a little bit better for the black at this point after either b6, just patiently sort of waiting with the bishop pair, or the move d4 that was played by Tabatabai in the game. So knight d1, knight f7, just getting out of any f5 nonsense. White goes knight f2, b6, and yeah, I mean at this point, if black plays the correct moves, like say if they go queen c7, and then go for bishop to d7 and or bishop b7 and just sort of prepare the c4 break steadily, then yeah, black's position is fairly pleasant. I mean, you can still argue as white you've got a King's Indian type of position where you don't have the bad bishop on light squares, but okay, it's certainly not a position black's going to complain about. Let's put it like this. But after queen d7, white starts to get a few things working with the move knight h1. Just a nice way to kind of maneuver the knight into the game once again. Black tries to anticipate this with f5 and g6 trying to play against the knight. But still, white plays a5 and the game starts to get a bit spicy from here. Where again, if black just plays bishop b7 and just kind of shuts things down on the queen side, and I think the black is doing pretty well in that case. But he played b5 immediately, and the difference now is that the move b4 now becomes a possibility. Because if black were to take the pawn, then we're able to basically get the pawn back. And then in the arising position, the d4 pawn will then become quite weak as such, where white will in fact be quite a bit better here. So instead, black decides to keep the tension. Here I kind of like a move like a6, just letting you jolt the bishop without worrying about the pawn coming in. Just a little bit of a prophylactic approach from black's point of view. And also if black can try to exert some pressure against that c2 pawn for some counterplay. But again, saw rook e8, and again, a6 would have been a nice way to sort of fix that bishop in place. Probably Kasimdzhanov didn't like queen c6 in this, but then you are able to get this pawn, so it kind of works out tactically for white here. But the game saw king h1 after a6, so black was able to correct his little imprecision. And with c3, yeah, maybe not the best move from a purely objective point of view. Actually, I take that back. C3 is actually a pretty good move here, where it does allow you to get that bishop active. Like, I was a little bit concerned about the backward d3 pawn, but it's actually not really a problem here. So white goes rook ab1. You could argue maybe it's not the most precise, that perhaps d1 might have been a better square for the rook to defend the pawn, but the game saw rook ab1, rook ac8, bishop a1. So yeah, you do have to figure out what to do about this battery, and Tabatabai played a very good defense of bishop f8. But after queen b2, yeah, there's a position where if you give white time, they can play moves like knight g5 and sort of bring the queen in the attack. So queen d3 is a move where if you're facing attack anyway, you may as well just take the pawn regardless. Now knight g5 can kind of be shut out with e5, just blocking that long diagonal in time to consolidate. But the game saw rook bd1, white played queen to a3. And yeah, maybe instead of queen a3, move like queen c2 was also possible, but maybe you didn't want to let the queen in like this, which does certainly look a little bit scary, even if the computer rather cold-bloodedly just says that there's no real follow-up for white. But queen a3 is fine. It does allow you to sort of try to swap off the queens and slow things down that way. And also here black, yeah, they could play a move like b4 if they want to, just sort of try to bring the pieces into the game, which, to be fair, probably does give black quite a nice advantage. But instead, rook c4 was played, and this is where white's not able to turn things around, because after bishop f3, after playing basically very well for pretty much the whole game, this is where finally black makes a big mistake, but maybe not for the reason you might expect. So what black should have done is just played ef5, and then if rook e1, bishop e4, that just kind of stabilizes and just allows black to keep the balance, because you're kind of able to sort of, get out of the queen h8 in time. But the problem with bishop f3 is not the move rook f3, but actually the move of gf3, which is probably what black missed in the game. That after ef5, if you do want to try and solve this position here, like put in the comments below what move you would play, and then we can see who managed to find the move that Kasimdzhanov played. So it turns out that actually the key move for white is to play knight h5. And you might have been thinking, well, maybe we go knight f5 and, take it with a pawn. Like, isn't that just a better version? But the difference is that black is not forced to take here. He can play queen e2, and suddenly, black is the one actually going the attack on the white king in a position like this one. So Instead, yeah, knight h5 has a difference that we're also setting up knight f6 as well as the obvious gh5 rook g1. And in the game, black just didn't really doesn't really have a way to deal with it simply. And after rook c6, white was able to actually, technically speaking, you should play like rook c1 first and get the rook out of the way and then go knight f6. But okay, as it was, we had knight f6 immediately. And if black does trade the queens, yeah, you do actually have some chances to save the game, just sort of based on that counterplay against the on the queen side, as it were, where you can sort of take a5 and try and make something happen with the queen side passes. But the attempt to keep the queens on just sort of backfired after rook g1. We are threatening some mating ideas, and bishop h6, rook d1, just continuing to be very precise. If the rooks get traded, it just opens the door for the mate, as it were. So after rook e8, we had bishop c3, and nice little finish here in the move of rook g6. And the reason that black resigned after rook g6 is that after takes and king f8, yeah, you basically just win the house with this this crisscross over here. So yeah, that was where the games I wanted to share. This one was a little bit of a longer video, but I think a nice opportunity to really understand the ideas of A4 and whether you decide to play A4 in your own games a lot or as a surprise weapon or you just were here for entertainment. I think you'll agree that learning about these ideas will definitely help you to play a lot of other types of positions that we saw, like with the Grand Prix, Rossolimo, the Tibiakov Grand Prix, even the F4 French line, with a lot more confidence and understanding by seeing how some similar positions from a different order of moves played out. So yeah, thanks for your attention, and I will see you in the next video with the next creative opening idea. Take care.